Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Mrinmoy Pramanik. I teach comparative Indian language and literature in the University of Calcutta. Now we will discuss Unit 1 of the paper Translation Studies, and that is Introduction to Translation Studies. And the module what we will discuss now is Translation Studies in 20th and 21st century. Mostly we will discuss about the trends and the theories which emerged in these two centuries. The practice of translation is quite long established, but the discipline of translation studies is fairly new. Translation is a set of activities carried out by a translator to convert a source language text into a text of the target language. A source text is a text from which the ideas are drawn. Target text, on the other hand, is a translated text in which the intended text is translated. Late 19th and early 20th century saw the dynamic upsurge in the development and progress of translation studies as a discipline. The ideas were obviously rooted in the German literary and philosophical traditions, romanticisms, hermeneutics, and existential phenomenology. Not only that, it also carries the erudition from antiquity to the late 19th century. Back then, the theories of translation studies also dealt with the long defined fields like literary theory, philosophy, rhetoric, and grammar. Some of the most cited scholars of translation studies of this period are Cicero, Horace, Quintilian, Augustine, Jerome, Dryden, Goethe, Schleiermacher, Arnold, and Friedrich Nietzsche. 20th century translation, on the other hand, has unfurled itself not only to varieties of linguistics, literary criticism, philosophical speculation, and cultural theory, but experimental studies and anthropological fieldwork, as well as translator training and translation practice. Some of the prominent theories and scholars of translation studies are mentioned below, who paved the path for the discipline in the 20th and the 21st century. First, we would like to talk about Walter Benjamin, 1892 to 1940. Walter Benjamin, in his seminal work, The Work of Art, proposed that history of every art form has critical periods in which the particular form strains after effects which can be easily achieved only with a changed technical standard, that is, a new art form. In other words, technological innovation do not improve the already existing art forms but try to create a new art form. This idea of Benjamin was carried forward into another important essay, The Task of the Translator, which is one of the most celebrated article in the discipline of translation studies, where he attempts to create an idea of translation as an art form which is unique in itself. In his opinion, translation is a mode. Moreover, as a translation is a mode of its own, the task of the translator too may be regarded as distinct and clearly differentiated from the task of the poet who originally is writing the text. Benjamin separates the action of the translator from the poet or novelist, giving translators their due independence as artists in their own distinct way. The task of the translator opens with a discussion of the appreciation of a work of art or an art form. Benjamin argues that the value of an art does not depend on its interpretation and its content to gain a moral lesson from it. Art is free of all of this. Art is definitely supposed to be meaningful, but it is not intended to give lessons to or delight or inform a person. Thus, according to Benjamin, if an original work is not responsible to communicate with its reader, then the translation also follows the same guidelines. This potent argument by Benjamin marks a step to establish translation as an independent art in its own right. From there, he also says that since translation is an art on its own, therefore the translator's tasks are quite different from that of a poet. To conclude, one last point should be made about Benjamin's analysis of the issues surrounding translation. It is also interesting to observe that for Benjamin, a translation also remains something provisional because in its afterlife, the original undergoes a change. Even words with fixed meaning can undergo a maturing process, and in the meantime, the mother tongue of the translator is transformed as well. So what sounded fresh once may sound hackneyed later. Thus, a translator should consider the significance of a text in its context and in the light on the changes it has to undergo throughout the ages, because this text will not have the same impact today than it had 50 years ago, for instance. As Benjamin aptly remarks, this, to be sure, is to admit that all translation is only a somewhat provisional way of coming to terms with the foreignness of language. Next we'll discuss about Ortega y Gasset, 1883 to 1955. Jose Ortega y Gasset is famous for his influential works in Spanish philosophy. Nonetheless, his reference and viewpoint about language is manifested throughout his works. This is quite prominent in his splendid essay, Misery and Splendor of Translation. In 1937, he wrote that Misery and Splendor of Translation, an essay that, as stated in previous works, has attained the status of a classic of translation theory. However, it would be interesting to find out whether Ortega's ideas play an operative and active role in contemporary translation studies. It was first published in an Argentinian journal, La Nación, in a series of 5 weekly articles between June 13 to July 11, 1937. In the beginning of his essay, Ortega explains the miseries or hardships of translation, as accepting these hardships would pave the path to the splendors of translation. He embarks on the journey by defining translation as a utopia activity. Is not the act of translating necessarily a utopian task? He asked. This is due to the cowardice of the translator. According to him, what will the translator do with the rebellious text? Is not it too much to ask that he also be rebellious, particularly since the text is someone else's? He will be ruled by cowardice. So instead of resisting grammatical restraints, he will do just the opposite. He will place the translated author in the prison of normal expression. That is, he will betray him. And Ortega attributes this to the author's personal writing style, which forms a deviation from the habitual usage, which results into the mismatch between the meaning of a word in between two languages. Mathematics and science, in Ortega's point of view, are two disciplines which face huge difficulties in translation, mainly due to untranslatability. He discusses the splendors of translation. He moves on to deliberate as to what he understands by the term translation and how the translators should strive to perfect the art of translation activity. Ortega then proceeds to establish some principles that should govern the new enterprise of translating and define what a translation should be. According to him, translation is not a duplicate of the original text. Translation does not even belong to the same literary genre as the text that was translated. Translation is a literary genre apart, with its own norms and own ends. A translation is not the work but a path toward the work. Imagine a form of translation that is ugly, as science has always been that does not intend to wear literary garb, that is not easy to read but is very clear indeed. So according to him, a translation is also a mode, and translation necessarily do not follow the original, or translation has no need to follow the original necessarily. Now let us discuss about Roman Jakobson, the Czech formalist, 1896 to 1982. Roman Jakobson's contribution in the discipline of translation studies is immense, because he categorizes the whole work of translation, all the possible works of translation. He offered the types of translation. Roman Jakobson distinguished 3 different types of translation in his seminal essay on linguistic aspect of translation. In his essay, Jakobson states that meaning of a word is a linguistic phenomenon. Using semiotics, Jakobson believes that meaning lies with the signifier and not in the signified. Thus, it is the linguistic verbal sign that gives an object its meaning. Interpretation of a verbal sign, according to Roman Jakobson, can happen in 3 ways, that is intralingual, interlingual and intersemiotic. In the case of interlingual translation, the changes take place within the same language. Thus, a verbal sign or word belonging to a particular language is replaced by another sign or another word belonging to the same language. Interlingual translation, on the other hand, can be seen as replacing a verbal sign with another sign but belonging to a different language. Interpretation of verbal sign, according to Roman Jakobson, can happen in 3 ways, that is interlingual, interlingual and intersemiotic, as I mentioned earlier. And interlingual translation is translation proper, according to Roman Jakobson. Now, intersemiotic translation and transmutation is an interpretation of verbal signs by means of signs of non-verbal sign system, like novel to film or story to a play. And Baker, Mona Baker in 1998 argues that interlingual translation is not a subsidiary form of translation, as is the popular perception. She also points out that most of the translation in the Greek language was interlingual rather than interlingual. For the major work was that of modernizing ancient Greek text. In most of the ancient Sanskrit plays, there were at least 3 dialectical versions of pure Sanskrit in use, which required the audience to translate as he or she watched the play. This was an intralingual translation rather than interlingual translation. But we also have to keep it in mind that in case of Sanskrit play, not only Sanskrit was used and not only the other dialects of Sanskrit was used, but Prakrit also was one of the major component of the linguistic structure of Sanskrit play. So, in case of Sanskrit play, it is not only about the intralingual translation. Next, let us talk about Eugene Nida, 1914 to 2011. And Eugene Nida is considered as one of the pioneer figure of modern translation theory and the discipline of translation studies. Eugene Nida was a linguist by profession. He was a key person who developed the dynamic equivalence theory and is considered as one of the founders of the modern disciplines of translation studies, as I mentioned. His pivotal theory of dynamic equivalence and formal equivalence are 2 dissimilar translation techniques involved, which are employed to achieve differing levels of literaliness between the original and target languages of a text. Formal equivalence focuses on the constancy to the lexical and grammatical details of the source language. Dynamic equivalence, on the other hand, employs more natural rendering but targets less on the literal precision. In the later following years, Nida separated himself from dynamic equivalence and introduced another term called functional equivalence. Functional equivalence suggests not just that the equivalence is between the function of the source text in the source culture and the function of the target text or translation in target culture, but that function can be thought of as a property of a text, that the it may be the original text or it may be the translated text, but function is already implied, function is already within the text. It means text has something to do with the culture or the literary polysystem. Naida argued that there are two different types of equivalence, namely formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence. Formal equivalence remains faithful to the source text without influencing the source text with the translator's idea. Formal equivalence aims in bringing forth the original message without corrupting it with the translator's thought. In other words, it is word-for-word translation. This is therefore much more of a word-for-word view of translation. Dynamic equivalence is an approach in which the text from the source language is translated thought for thought. Each sentence or the thought is taken up separately and the same meaning is rendered in the target language. So word is not an unit for translating in case of dynamic equivalence. But in this process, the translator pays least attention to maintain the idiom or phrasal consistency of the target language with the source language, because it's all about the translating the thought. This technique is more pointed towards the case of readability and also tries to maintain some faithfulness to the original text without simply paraphrasing the original text. And it always keeps mind, this type of translation always keeps mind the syntax and the beauty of the target language, and keeping the syntax and beauty of the language in mind, translator does his or her work of translating. For a work of fiction, for instance, a novel, formal equivalence is of much more use because it retains the ideas of the source text and also remains faithful to the lexical and grammatical structure of the same. Dynamic equivalence is of extreme use when the target language is very dissimilar from the source language. This is so because a language which is immensely different from the source language, it becomes very difficult to find idioms or phrasal equivalents in the target language. In addition to the NIDA also puts forth three basic factors which account for the contrast in translation. The first one is the nature of the message, and the second one is the purpose of the author and of the translator, and the third one is the type of audience. He maintains that it is quite difficult to find identical equivalents, so a translator should always look for closest natural equivalents. Now let us discuss about J.C. Catford, 1917 to 2009. John C. Catford put forward his theory of translation based on the principles of general linguistics developed by Michael Halliday. Catford argued that translation studies should be an integral part of comparative linguistics because the central problem of translation studies is to find translation equivalents in the target language. He defines translation as, I quote, the replacement of textual material in one language by equivalent translation material in other language. He further distinguishes between textual equivalence and formal correspondence. He, in 1965, defines textual equivalence as any target language text or portion of a text which is to be equivalent of a given source language text or a portion of the text. Moreover, he defines formal correspondence as any target language category which can be said to occupy as nearly as possible the same place in the economy of the target language as the given source language category occupies in the source language. Catford organizes the types of translation into three ways. Number one is subject to the extent of source language text adhered to the translation process, and it is further can be divided in two ways. One is full translation, another is the partial translation. The second one is subject to the levels of language involved in the process of translation, and it is again can be categorized as two. One is the total translation and the second is the restricted translation. And the third one is subject to the rank in a grammatical hierarchy at which the translation equivalence is established, and it is also divided in two parts. One is rank bound translation and another one is rank free translation. In Catford's opinion, Meaning forms the core of any translation activity. Therefore, it is clearly necessary for translation theory to draw upon the theory of meaning. Without such a theory, certain important aspects of the translation process cannot be discussed. Next is Holmes, James S. Holmes, 1924 to 1986. Dutch-based US scholar of translation studies, James Holmes coined the term translation studies in his key defining paper which he delivered in 1972. This paper was widely circulated after 1988, and Holmes defines translation studies as the complex of problems clustered around the phenomena of translating and translations. He proposed that the main intention of the then nascent discipline is to define the theory of translation studies properly. So, with this introduction of Holmes, we can understand that what is the significance of Holmes in the discipline of translation studies. It is not only because that he is a theorist of translation studies, but the title of the discipline comes from his paper, and he was one of the pioneering figure who defines the activities and aims of the discipline called translation studies. His book, The Name and Nature of Translation Studies, is considered as a landmark in the field of translation studies. It provides a theoretical system that both recognizes and unifies many aspects of translation studies. It predicts an entire future discipline and effectively encourage work aimed at establishing that discipline. Holmes grouped and mapped scientifically and arranged his topics hierarchically. He divided the discipline into applied and pure translation studies, and then applied was further disintegrated into theoretical and descriptive. Descriptive translation studies describes the observable facts of translating and translation as they manifest themselves in the world of our experience. The purpose of the theory of translation studies is to establish general principles by means of which these phenomena can be explained and predicted. Not only that, descriptive was again divided into product oriented and process oriented and function oriented and so on. Product oriented descriptive translation studies mainly revolves around the description of individual translations. Process oriented descriptive translation studies aims at revealing the thought process that take place in the mind of the translator while she or he is translating. Function oriented descriptive translation studies include research which describes the function or impact that a translation or a collection of translations has had in the socio-cultural situation of the target language. The empirical finding of descriptive translation studies often aids theoretical translation studies. It describes principles, theories, and models to explain and predict what the process of translation is. Given certain conditions, such as a particular pair of languages or a particular pair of text, theoretical translation studies is further subdivided into general translation theory and partial translation theory. Holmes maintains that the aim of the discipline is to explain and predict all the phenomena and processes involved in the activity of translation. Theoretical translation studies hold both a general translation theory and partial translation theories. Holmes established the final aim of the discipline as the elaboration of a general theory capable of explaining and predicting all phenomena regarding translating and translation. Holmes distinguishes 6 different types of partial translation theory: medium restricted, area restricted, rank restricted, text type restricted, time restricted, and problem restricted. Now let us talk about Itamar Evanchour. Itamar Evanchour born in 1939 and he is a translation theorist of Tel Aviv School. Itamar Evanchour is a translation theorist who propounded the polysystem theory, which is not only significant for the discipline of translation studies but to find the situation of translated text in the greater literary system of target text and how the translation interacts with target language, target culture, and the readers. This is one of the most influential theory of the 20th century, as it attempted to locate translation within the context of literature in the receptor language. This work was originally published in French and was published in English as Papers in Historical Poetics. Since Eventuer's polysystem theory was directly influenced from the Russian formalism, therefore it is necessary to understand the key concepts of the Russian formalism. The formalist approach towards a literary piece of text was to consider it as an entity or a separate structure on its own. Jurij Tyankov proposed the idea that a piece of literature, literary or non-literary, should be known for its literariness. In other words, the qualities of a text played a key role in making it unique. But at the same time, it is necessary to know more about its tradition. Thus, in order to explain this relationship, he brought forward the concept of system, which offered a general model for understanding, analyzing, and describing the functioning and evolution of literary system, which are in dialectical relation to one another. According to Itamar Eventuer, it is a heterogeneous and a hierarchical conglomerate of systems which interact among each other to bring about an ongoing dynamic process of evolution within the polysystem as a whole. This dynamic method of evolution is necessary for the polysystem because it demonstrates the relationship between the innovatory and conservative systems, which are in a steady status of instability and competition. Due to this instability, the status of literature in the target language is not permanent in the polysystem. It may take up a primary or a secondary position in the two. If it is primary, it contributes dynamically in shaping the center of the polysystem. Eventuer classifies three social circumstances in which translation may preserve a primary position. The first one is when a literature is at its developing stage, when a literature is marginal or feeble or both, when a literature contains a vacuum or finds itself in a state of crisis or at a turning point. He argued, translated literature fulfills the needs of a young literature to put its renewal tongue in use in as many literary genres as possible in order to make it functional as a literary language and useful for its emerging public. Since when it is young and in the process of being established, a young literature cannot create major text in all genres until its polysystem has crystallized. It greatly benefits from the experience of other literatures, and translated literature becomes in a way one of its most important system. And that is why the history of translation can help us to read the history of development of target language, to history of the literature of target language, and history of culture of target language too. Now let us discuss about André Lefebvre, 1945 to 1996. André Lefebvre was a translation theorist who regarded translation as a form of rewriting. He regarded translation as an act carried out under the influence of particular categories and norms constitute to systems in a society. In Lefebvre's views, rewriting is an adaptation of a work of literature to a different audience with the intention of influencing the way in which that audience reads the work. An example of rewriting is the translation of Victor Hugo's Les Miserables by Munif Pasha in 1860 into Turkish. He argues that action is an important element in this translation, where the readers are held in suspense for the next episode, not only to boost the circulation of the newspaper, but also to entertain the readers and to create a positive atmosphere. For the printing of newspaper and the development of journalism in the Reformation period, the 19th century of the Ottoman Empire, With the modernization and westernization initiatives led by Ataturk, the founder and first president of the Turkish Republic, a full-scale translation initiative was envisaged by the Ministry of National Education. This activity was organized, manipulated, and conducted by the state itself. From the selection of the works to be translated to the establishment of the guideline in the translation process that would serve the spirit that lay behind the whole initiative. Now let us discuss about Susan Bassnett. Susan Bassnett took birth in the year of 1945. Susan Bassnett is one of the most renowned theorists in the world, academics, who contributed a lot in the discipline of translation studies and the discipline of comparative literature. Her book Translation Studies, which was published in 2002, is an indispensable text for any aspiring student of translation studies and has marked its dominance in the contemporary scenario of translation studies. This book provides translation studies with much of its impetus and pedagogical direction, and in that way this book is remarkable. In this book, Bassnett explores translation as a semiotic and a cultural act which adheres itself strictly to the linguistic process. She highlights the problem of equivalence which a translator faces when she or he decodes the source language and records the message in the target language. She illustrates this idea by providing the example of butter in English and burro in Italian. She argues that these two nomenclature might signify the same food object but vary in their meaning in a wider cultural context. She elaborates this example by mentioning that in Italian, burro means an unsalted butter which is yellow in color and is used as a spread on the bread. But butter in English holds high prestige than burro. Nonetheless, the phrase bread and butter is considered acceptable even when the product is actually margarine, which is an imitation butter spread. Bassnett also implied the importance of translation studies in the discipline of comparative literature, post-colonial studies, and in the area of globalization studies. Lawrence Venuti. Venuti took birth in 1953 and he contributed a lot to the development of the discipline of translation studies. He produced several scholarly books which are the profound books for the discipline of translation studies. The base of the translation studies as a discipline is dependent on those books which are produced by Lawrence Venuti. Venuti is considered as one of the sharpest minds of the 21st century in the modern translation theory. Not only this, he is known to differ from the mainstream translation theorist. He is critical of the point that a translator is an invisible figure. His seminal work, The Translator's Invisibility, A History of Translation, has been in the limelight and criticism since it has been published. In it, he lays out his theory that so-called domesticating practices at work in society have contributed to the invisibility of the translator in translations, claiming that legal and cultural constraints make it so that faithful rendition is defined partly by the illusion of transparency, such that foreignizing or experimental types of translation are likely to encounter opposition from publishers and large segments of Anglophone readers who read the immediate intelligibility. This leads to a situation in which fluency is the most important quality for a translation, and all traces of foreignness or alterity tend to be purposely erased in a manifestation of ethnocentric violence. As a solution to this problem, Venuti puts forward the strategy of foreignization, which targets at sending the reader abroad instead of bringing the author back home. As it is the case when a translation is domesticated, he conceives translation as an interpretive act with far-reaching social effects, which is enabled and constrained by specific cultural situations. Now let us conclude the discussion. As mentioned earlier, modern translation theory owes its development to the first translation workshop, which was held in the USA in 1964. In the 20th century, translation studies as a discipline has become mixed hybrid because of the cultures which have become hybrid too. The translator should keep in mind that a translation activity is not limited to just the source text and the target text, but to two different cultures. Translation has been given a new meaning, and translation theories have attained an independent status now, which play an important role in international communication and globalization. The future of translation studies in the 21st century is enormous. Now there is a list of further reading what you can see on the screen, and to mention that this content is written by Anshika Adhikari. Thanks.